بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So alhamdulillah, we are continuing with the Tafsīr of Sūrah al-Talāq. One important thing that Shaykh Amin he mentioned today is that the ayat of taqwa, of being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and tawakkul, trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must contextualize these ayat to where they appear in the Quran. This is something that Mufassirun do often. It goes by different names. Sometimes it's called Nadhmul Ayat. Nadhm comes from the word of literally how you put beads together on a necklace, so you string them together. So how do ayat connect to each other? So you have Nadhmul Ayat, you have Nadhmul Surah. How do surahs connect to each other? How do ayat connect to each other? So sometimes it's called Nadhmul Ayat, sometimes it's called Rabtul Ayat. How do you tie them together? And it goes by different names. And a person that pays attention to Shaykh Amin's tafsir, you notice that Shaykh Amin he does give consideration, and he does pay attention to that. And one thing that he brought about today is that often when we think about taqwa, tawakkul, perhaps our perception of taqwa and tawakkul is it has to do with salah, it has to do with zakah, it has to do with not eating pork or drinking wine. Yeah. But seldom does our mind go to the social order. So from last week, if you remember, when the surah spoke about the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the hudud, tilka hududullah. Right? These are the limits and the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, referring to that when divorce occurs, the woman must stay in the house of the husband for the iddah, for the period that has been stipulated, which we saw some details about today, that if it's someone that's in a menopause, then it goes by 3 months, وَاللَّائِي لَمْ يَحِضْنَ, and if they haven't had menstruation, there's also 3 months. If it's pregnancy, then it's still the term of the pregnancy, the delivery. And so for different women, different terms. Nonetheless, the point is that is the had of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the woman must stay in the husband's house. Now, divorce doesn't usually happen when both parties are happy with each other. They're usually trying to get away from each other. So whether we understand the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not, that why are two people that are trying to get away from each other, why are they being asked to stay in the same house? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this is the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And usually, as Shaykh Min put it, in talaq, there is plenty of human emotion to go around. Right? Now, in such a situation, right, this is where we must use the device and the technique of taqwa. And as Shaykh Amin here put it really nicely, is to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than the situation. So in the scenario, in the case of talaq and divorce, when both parties are required to stay in the same house, the human emotion might be, I don't see a way out. How am I supposed to get out of this? Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. That if you have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than the situation that you are in, the situation is not greater than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way out for you, even if you don't see yourself the way out. You don't see the way. And this is when Shaykh Amin mentioned that this is when a person he or she dips into the ghaib. Right? Now you are attracting from the unseen the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one thing that Sheikh Amin mentioned over here is that tawakkul isn't that a person doesn't use the means. You do use the means. You use what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, and then you leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in terms of finding a way out, one thing that Sheikh Amin he really emphasized today is that a way out isn't always necessarily that the situation is dissolved, right? Or what we would consider as humans, that okay, the situation has effectively been has been effectively been taken care of. It's no longer there. The difficulty is no longer there. But that's not necessarily what makhraj or escape or a way out means. The way out could be in the form that although the difficulty is still there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the ability to manage that difficulty. Because you are a human, you are going to feel human emotions and you are going to go through the full range of human emotions. So the goal of the deen and the goal of taqwa and tawakkul is not to raise you above human emotions. If there are any created beings that we would have expected perhaps that they would be above human emotions and they would not need to experience human emotions, it would have been the prophets. But even the prophets, they felt pain. Now, they felt pain, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the ability and the resolve to navigate and manage this pain, where this pain didn't stop them. So that is what could be the meaning, and is one of the meanings of makhraja, a way out. One very interesting point that Sheikh Amin he made over here is that how does a person know that they're actually having tawakkul and trust upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's when the means that they adopted don't work, that person is not disappointed. Right? Sheikh Imam Ghazali rahimahullah in his Ihya, he mentioned the same exact thing. He actually mentions that as the litmus test for trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because sometimes it's very difficult to tell that when you are using the means, right? For example, Sheikh Amin give the example of medication. Yeah. A person takes the medication and says that, well, I'm taking the medication. Verbally, the person says that, yes, I believe that it's not the medication that is ultimately the provider of cure. I believe that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is ultimately the provider of cure. Now, a person can say that verbally, but then how does a person know that, okay, do I actually have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it just words? So Imam Ghazali rahimahullah in his Ihya, he mentions that the litmus test of that is that when the means fail to deliver, the person is not disappointed. Which is, subhanAllah, is so difficult. Because it's so human of us that, for us to tie our expectations to what we repeatedly and regularly see to be the means of something in this world. But the test of tawakkul is that, if you actually believe that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who does, then when the means fail, that's where your aqidah kicks in. It's like, well, it wasn't meant to be. I never really believed that it was the means that was going to provide anyway, that was going to do something. If Allah's amr, if Allah's command was with that means, then yes, the result that I was hoping for would take place. But this is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed at the moment, and I am pleased and content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed. I will continue to look for a solution. I will look for another means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made available to me. So this is the meaning of tawakkul. Oftentimes people get the meaning of tawakkul incorrect. Now, then the last thing that Sheikh Amin he spoke about, and he spent considerable time speaking about this, is this kind of he used the word fufu a lot today. Um, uh, that sometimes when our approach to doing good deeds, our approach to doing good deeds, sometimes we develop this holier than thou attitude that I'm above reward. I'm above wanting a physical reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or on the flip side, I'm above fearing a physical punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's that's just simply not how it works. So one thing I really, and I hope I'm quoting Sheikh correctly over here. He mentioned something that is very insightful. He said, if you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you ask him for reward. Right? And immediately something that came to my mind was that even within human beings you have different love languages. Right? So for someone their love language might be touch, and for someone else their love language might be giving gifts. So what Sheikh Amin was saying today is that I want to make sure that people don't misunderstand, right? That but am I not supposed to want the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is that not a high ideal? Of course it is. But what's he saying? What he's saying is that how, and that's what he mentioned as well, that the proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure is in that reward. Right? So how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala express his love for you? Is that he rewards you. So if you begin to develop the attitude like, oh, I don't want the reward. I mean, think about the optics, what you're basically, in terms, not optics, like think about in terms of your adab with Allah, your etiquette with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you're implying through this approach and this attitude is that you're telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm above how you're expressing your love for me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of human beings. He recognizes the human psyche. He knows the human psyche. I don't think recognize is the right word here. He knows the psyche of the human being. And based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge of the human psyche, he knows how to express his love to human beings. The way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expresses his love to human beings is giving them physical reward, physical pleasures and blessings in Jannah. So we are not above wanting reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the context of divorce, and by extension in the context of any test that a human being is in, whether that test is in the form of fulfilling a obligation, whether that test is in the form of abstaining from a prohibition, whether that test is in the form of being patient in a difficult time, a believer should expect and hope for a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in fact hope that that reward is magnified, as we saw towards the end of our tafsir. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يُكَفِّرْ عَنْهُ سَيِّئَاتِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will erase the sin, وَيُعْظِمْ لَهُ أَجْرًا, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will magnify the reward. Inshallah, I'll end with this. And whenever this discussion comes up, I often mention this. That I remember one time I was in class with one of my Asatida, Mufti Alauddin, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him. One of the students had answered the question correctly, and the Shaykh Ustad, he called up the student to give him like 10 rands. Rands is the South African currency. And the student felt he felt shy. I said, no Ustad, like it's okay, like so then the Ustad, he explained to us, then he's like, look, it's the fact that I'm giving you 10 rands, you shouldn't say no. My giving you this 10 rand, this is my expression of me being pleased with your answer. I'm pleased that you answered correctly. And that's exactly what Shaykh Amin said. He said that the reward is the final proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. If you just say like I want the pleasure of Allah, where do you find that pleasure? What is the proof of Allah's pleasure? The proof of Allah's pleasure is his reward that he's giving you. Right? So we shouldn't have this holier than thou attitude. We want everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. We're not above begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his reward, which is the proof of his love. So we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower us with his reward. Right? Because when we are showered in that reward, we are being showered in the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to correctly understand and implement what we heard and what was said. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.